All right, getting into the next segment on Module 1, we're going to talk about the advantages of having not just a database, but a properly designed relational database. So the first one being better information is provided. And so what we mean by that is kind of going back to that spreadsheets and the flat file. If you're using that, data is kind of, it's disjointed. You're going to have several different spreadsheets and different lists and things like that. And it's going to be hard to access and retrieve exactly what it is that you want. You're going to have to do a lot more digging, and it'll be a lot more complicated than databases allow. Another advantage is, the information is shared, right? If you're working in a spreadsheet file and say, you make copies and distribute it to the different employees, if an employee makes a change in the spreadsheet, it's not going to get reflected in the other employees' spreadsheets, right? Because they're separate files. In a database, when you make that change, it makes it to the actual core data itself. And so whoever else accesses that database is going to see that change reflected. Multiple business information requirements are addressed. Yeah, so that's just basically, kind of assigning or having someone in the role of a database administrator, where they kind of, keep track of the database overall, keep track of the organization and the structure of it, and things like that. Database redundancy is minimized. Yeah, we kind of looked at that at one of the first segments, right, where we have, the same client listed out on 6 or 7 different lines within the spreadsheet, right? In a database, that doesn't happen. You got, your client table. When you retrieve it, it just pulls out that one specific client. It's not duplicated, and then you can have access to all that information related to that client. Database consistency is applied. We're going to get into things like constraints and things like that, and that's just only allowing data to be entered in a specific way. For example, if you have a field or an attribute of state, like as in an address, you can constrain that field to only accept data in a 2-character format, like NH for New Hampshire, instead of typing it all out. Referential integrity. So we're going to talk more about that later on. And that's just basically kind of implementing a set of constraints or a set of rules to provide validation for the data. For example, in like a one-to-many relationship, like clients to projects or project estimate, right? Having that referential integrity means that we could not create a project estimate for a client that doesn't exist, right? It also means that we couldn't do things like delete a client that still has projects associated with it, right? So that's what referential integrity is. It's kind of creating these constraints, these rules that kind of validate our data and ensure that we don't kind of mess up our database. Security, yeah, we all know security is important, right? Aside from database management systems allowing for the encryption of data, they also allow for the use of user IDs and groups and things like that, as well as permissions to specific data and things like that. So definitely a good thing there. More productivity, yeah, this is done through reliable data and reports, things like that. It also means you don't have to rely on programmers for, putting in more data or removing data and things like that. And then data is freed from individual applications. What this is saying is basically it kind of allows you to kind of alter the database structure without having to change your programs that access the database or things like that. So what does a healthy database, relational database look like? Well, here are some key factors to kind of help you see what it looks like. The first one being design. Yeah, the design of the database is critical in how we set up our entities and attributes, create the relationships and things like that, making sure that the attributes that we select for our tables, for our entities, can only provide one single unique answer, those type of things, right? We're going to get into design much more later on, that normalization process that I mentioned and things like that, but that's the first one. Security, always a big issue, as I mentioned, right? Always something important to take into consideration, making sure that the database is secure, that you have a backup of it. In case something happens to your database, having that redundancy is really important. Data is critical nowadays, so you need to make sure that that you have a backup in place. And then depending on, the database and the size of the database and the data that's in it, you may need to hire someone that specifically manages that database, that DBA that we mentioned earlier, the database administrator. So having someone to do that and to know what they're doing and to do it well can be very important to an organization. All right, so that's been advantages of a properly designed relational database. I hope this has been beneficial, and we'll see you next time.